5 years ago, my husband and I, we both sing together. We were asked to lead music for a Christian cruise. Now, if you are ever asked that question, I just want you to know the answer is an automatic yes. Yes, we will be able to do that. We had never had that experience before. And they said, we'll pay your way. All you need to do is provide your own passports. We said, no problem, done. We had about 3 months, so I knew we had to get going on these passports. And at this time, we were living in Houston, Texas. Has anyone lived in Houston, Texas? Have you survived a Houston, Texas summer? It's hot, and this was in July. And I was looking through all the paperwork in the house, couldn't find our birth certificates, and went out in the garage. And in Houston, Texas, no joke, they have flying cockroaches that are this big. I know. We moved there, and they said, be careful of flying cockroaches. And I said, you're kidding, right? They said, no. And they really are. They're humongous. And I'm out in our garage looking for our birth certificates to get these passports. And I found my husband's, found the ones for my 2 boys, and I couldn't find mine anywhere. So I searched and searched, took a couple days, and I thought there's got to be an easier way to get my birth certificate. So I went online, and I found out that for $35, you can type in your information, and in a week, you get a copy of your certificate of live birth. So it was a Sunday afternoon, put my information in, done. I thought, good, in a week we'll have it, we'll get our passports going. That Monday morning, I was listening to the messages on my phone. And there was a message that came on, and she said it was the lady from Rochester, New York, where I was born, way upstate New York. And she said, either you entered your information wrong or you weren't born in Rochester. And I thought, well, that is strange. Maybe I had the wrong name of where I was born, or maybe I put the wrong information in. And I called her back, and I said, I'm wide awake. Let me make sure I give you the right information. I gave that to her. She said, let me run it through our system. She came back on and she said, I don't know what to say. We don't have anything in our records for you. And I thought, that is so strange. Happy Monday morning to me. And I said, well, what do? I need to have a copy of my birth certificate. And she said, check with Albany, New York. It's the state capital. They'll have everything there. So I found the number, called up. It took me quite a ways to get to the right person. She got on the phone, and I said, I'm calling to see if my birth certificate is in your office. And she said, the lady said, well, we can't do any of that over the phone. And I said, I just really need to know if my certificate's there. I need a passport. I said, please. She said, we can't. And I said, please, some more. And I won. Then I won. And she said, well, let me check. And I listened to Barry Manilow for about 5 minutes. And then she finally got back on, and she said, I don't know what to say. We don't have any records of your birth in our office. And I'm thinking, do I need to go to Washington, D.C.? Is that where my birth certificate is? And then she said, have you checked with the adoption registry office? And I'm thinking, well, why in the world would I do that? And then she transferred me down to that office. You think you have bad Monday mornings? This was a weird one. And so I talked to the lady. She answered. She said, adoption registry office. I said, I'm not really sure why I was transferred to you. I said, I'm just trying to locate a copy of my certificate of live birth. And she said, well, who transferred you down? I said, I don't remember the name of the lady. And she said, no one is ever supposed to transfer calls down to this office, and hung up. See, that's a Monday morning. And I called my husband and I said, okay, weirdest thing ever just happened. I said, I don't know where I'm going to be able to get my birth certificate. So I thought, let me call my parents. I don't know. I'm thinking, I have the wrong city. Maybe I lived there when I was little, or dementia is setting in at 41 and it's already going, and it's going to be a sad road ahead. So I left a message for my parents, and I said, they can't find my birth certificate in New York. And I also, I felt like a little 2-year-old girl. I said, I was born in New York, right? In Rochester, could you call me back? And about 5 days went by. I don't know if they were out of town. Finally, I called back, and my dad answered. And I don't know if your parents are like my parents, but they can talk for about 10, 15 minutes on the weather. And my dad got on, and I think all of you were having a lot of rain that summer. 5 years ago, you had a lot of rain, I think. And my dad was talking about all the rain and flooding that was happening, and I'm thinking, Do you know where my birth certificate is? And did I have the wrong city name and the wrong state? And finally, I jumped in and I said, Dad, did you get my message? And he said, yes, you were born in Rochester. You were born in New York. Aliens didn't drop you off. Ha ha. He said, don't worry about anything. He said, we'll send you your original birth certificate. We have it. So I thought, all is well, all is fine. I don't know what happened with that whole adoption registry office. That was weird, but I'll be fine. My birth certificate came the next week, and I opened it up, and it's a little half sheet. And it said, this is to certify that my name, born May 18, 1966, Rochester, New York, with a little stamp seal on it. And I looked at that, and I looked at my husband's, and I looked at my boys, and they all had doctors and hospital and footprint and all kinds of cutesy stuffs on theirs, and I didn't have anything. And I said, this is a weird birth certificate. So I called up my brother, who's 3 years older. And I called him, and I said, hey, I just got to tell you what's been happening. And I told him about the adoption registry office, and he just laughed. He thought it was the funniest thing ever. He said, first of all, there's no way. He said, you are the spitting image of Mom. I look more and more like Dad every day. There's no way. And he thought it was very funny that I even maybe thought, were we adopted? I said, well, do you have your birth certificate available? And he went to the drawer, pulled his out. He didn't have to dig. I don't know. He was nice and organized. And he read it to me, and I said, well, that sounds like mine. I said, something is weird. And he said, don't even think about it. Don't worry, we're just fine. So yes, that birth certificate worked to get my passport, but there was something inside of me that I just couldn't put that down. And wondering what in the world is different about my birth certificate. And I got online and I Googled and I looked up, and everything that I saw that came on the screen that looked like my birth certificate was one that was used for adoptions. And I thought, there's no way. And I thought, I need to trace where I was born, what hospital I was born in. Maybe they have my original. Maybe I'm just imagining all this. So I called up, left a message with my mom. I said, can you give me the name of the hospital where I was born? I would love to trace to find my original birth certificate. A couple days later, called her back. She answered, and I said, no more weather. Do you have the name of the hospital? And she said, I don't remember the name of the hospital where you were born. And I thought, that's weird. Maybe we're both experiencing dementia early. And I thought, well, I know mine. My kids were born in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I remember that because I wrote them multiple checks so I could buy my child from them. Don't we? And the pain that we experienced at that hospital, you just can't forget that. It was written all over my gown as I was in pain. I saw where I was having my children. And I said, you don't remember the name? And she said, we wanted something more like a clinic. It was something different. And inside of me, I'm thinking, there's no way. And I heard God, not strongly, but I heard him whisper to me, find out more. And that's something that's hard to do as a daughter with parents. And I grew up wanting to be the good girl. And I thought, how do I question my parents if they're telling me the truth or not? And I called up and we talked again, and I said, I've just got to ask you, is there anything you need to tell me? I was down to 3 years old. Is there anything, Mommy, you need to tell me? No, you're our daughter. Don't worry about anything. And I said, is there anything that would surprise me that I might find out from the state of New York? No, no, no. You're our kid. And I heard that voice again saying, find out more. I got in touch with this adoption registry office. I'm thinking, this is the craziest thing I've ever done in my life. I don't even know why I'm doing this, but I have to find out more. And I got in touch with them, and I said, you probably don't have many calls like this. I'm 41 years old. I'm not sure if I'm adopted or not. How would I go about finding out maybe if I was? And they said, well, fill out all this paperwork, send it in to us, and we'll check for you. there were about 4 or 5 pages of information I had to fill out, and many things were your birth mom's name and what hospital you were born in, and I had nothing. And if you had any siblings, I had nothing. If you had a birth siblings, I didn't even know. And I sent that in, and I thought, those gals in that office are probably going, hey, come here, Hazel, upstate New York. You got to read this one. Look at this girl. Who doesn't know that? And I got a letter from them a couple weeks later. And it said, we just want you to know we accepted your application into the adoption registry. As soon as we have information for you, we'll get that to you. Please know it could take 6 to 12 months, if not more. I read that as saying, you're adopted. And my husband said, don't jump to that conclusion. What if it just means that they're going to check their records to see if you have adoption records? That was September of that year. This all started in July. I went from September, October, November, December, January, not knowing. And I don't know if you're like I am. Sometimes at night, when this all gets washed off, and you look in the mirror, and if you're like me, if you put your face down, and you look in the mirror, and you say, I look just like my... And I would do that, and I think, I look just like my mom. There's no way. And I look again, I think, well, what if there's someone else that I look just like more? What if I'm that scenario of a master and the dog, and after so many years, they start resembling each other, and I'm the dog? And everyone said, well, of course you belong to each other. You look so much alike. What if I only thought I looked like her because I was raised with her? But no, everyone has always told me, you know whose child that is. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and all those little cutesy sayings. That was me. And my brother, who's 3 years older, looks just like my dad. My parents are musical. I'm musical. There's no way. But what if? If I'm not theirs, then whose am I? Who am I? Where did I come from? What's my story? All those months went by, and January finally came, and I thought, this is crazy. I just need to know. Yes or no, adopted, not adopted. So I got in touch with the adoption registry again. I wrote them a letter, and I said, would you please verify for me in writing, hello, I'm the 41-year-old, whether I am adopted or not, if you have that file or not. 2 weeks later, went out to our mailbox, flicked all those flying cockroaches away, and opened up the letter. And I thought, here is my answer. Who finds this out in a letter? And I opened it up and I started reading. It said, Mrs. Hart, this is to verify that you were both born and adopted in the state of New York. All of a sudden, I didn't know where this all came from. I didn't know who I really was. I knew who I was, and I was a mother of teenagers and a wife to a wonderful man, but all of a sudden, my life changed. Where did I come from? And I thought, Lord, is this an unexpected gift? What is this? Who doesn't know this? Who finds this out at 41? And I realized I had a choice to make. I grew up in the church. My husband is a worship pastor. I've sung songs not that good, but I've sung songs my whole life. The hymns, the choir songs. These wonderful words saying, when I walk through tough times, I will trust in the Lord. And all of a sudden, I had this unexpected gift in front of me. I thought, how am I going to react? How are my sons going to view me? I have a choice to make. I could lay on the couch and watch Oprah and Dr. Phil 24/7, which I did a couple days like that, not bad. Or I could choose to rejoice, for my steps are ordered of God. I could choose that the joy of the Lord is my strength, even though I don't know what my path holds. I don't know where this road is going. I don't know what my journey is about to show me. And when I would get out of bed in the morning, as we all do, we get out and we go to the restroom. I'd literally go, I'm walking out my story. I'm walking it out. I don't know where it's going. I don't know the end result, but I'm walking it out, and I will trust that there is a reason and a purpose to what is happening in my life. I wrote a letter to my parents saying, I love you. You are my mom and dad. You might want to sit down, by the way. I found this out, and I'm just curious to know if you have any information for me. Thank you for the ballet lessons and gymnastics lessons. They did nothing for me, but thank you for them. Thank you for making me who I am and teaching me about God. But I'm curious to know my story. Sent that off, and I put my little Nancy Drew hat on, and I thought, I've got a mystery to solve. I didn't even know if my birth mom was alive. I didn't know what her relationship might be, or if she was even interested in a daughter that 41 years ago she gave up for adoption. I didn't know. Did a lot of searching. I mean, in the Google search, I put birth daughter, May 18, 1966, searching, birth mother, birth child, Rochester, New York. I put everything in there. Nothing came up except I found this wonderful group of people in Yahoo. There's a chat group in Yahoo. Who knew? Yahoo, who knew? I'm a poet and I know. No, I'm kidding. And so found these people and their adoptees and their birth mothers that help each other search. And I put my information in there, and I said, I don't know what hospital I was born in. I don't know anything else other than who my parents are. And someone said, I was also adopted from Rochester in 1966. He said, do you know what agency you were adopted from? I said, I have no idea. He said, let me tell you the three that were there at that time. He said, if you were adopted from this one, this North Haven, he said, they still have records from the 60s of those babies and the birth mothers. And I thought, how amazing. Got in touch with all three. Happened to find out, unbelievable. I got in touch with this North Haven. They said, yes, you were adopted from us. And this lady said, we'll get all that paperwork together. Please know that we won't give exact names or details, but it'll be general information. They said, we actually have about 4 or 5 pages about your birth mom. I thought, how amazing. She said, it'll take a few weeks to get it all together, but if you wait, we'll get that to you. In this same Yahoo chat group, 2 gals in the same week said they had hired this certain company. And they said, we've been searching for our birth mom for 25 and 20 years. And they said, we hired searching to see if we could ever find in this company located our birth mothers in 3 and 4 weeks. 2 separate gals, 2 separate situations. And I thought, I don't even know if I have 20 or 25 years to search. I don't know if she's alive. I know nothing, but I got in touch with this company. And I said, here's my information. They said, is that all you have? I said, yeah. Don't have a whole lot. They said, we know we can search for you, but please know it could take 6 to 12 months, if not more, if ever. They said, New York is an extremely tightly sealed state. We will do our best, but please just know it could take a long time. I said, no problem. I faxed my contract to them. They said, you don't have to pay a penny till we find her, and I thought, that's a great deal. Sent my contract on a Thursday afternoon at 3 o'clock. And I thought, I really need to just let this go. I'm going to put all this up in a little cubby. I'm not going to think about it. I'm just going to be mom and wife and do normal life. 23 hours after I faxed in my contract, I got a call from the company. They said, Mrs. Hart, we have solved your case. I said, it was that easy? And they said, it wasn't easy, but we found her. Your birth mom is alive. She's living in Atlanta, Georgia. It looks as if you might have 2 younger half-brothers. We have all kinds of information of aunts and an uncle and grandparents, and we'll get that to you. I got that fax. Again, who thinks you're going to get a fax with that kind of information? Unbelievable. And I looked at the name, and I saw an address and phone number. Address, phone number. If I write, it could take 5 to 7 days. What if it's not her? And I looked at the phone number, and I thought, Atlanta, Georgia is probably about 9 o'clock there. Do I? I picked up the phone, plugged in my phone, dialed the number, and I thought, oh my goodness, what do you say? And a gentleman answered the phone, and I almost wanted to say, are you my dad? Like the book, Are You My Mommy? Do you know the book, Are You My Mom? And I thought, I don't want him having a heart attack right there and not even be able to talk to my birth mom. So I asked him if Susan was there. And he said, yes. May I ask who's calling? And I thought, her daughter? Dead? No. I said, this is Kirsten Hart from Houston, Texas. What do you say? And so he said, just a minute. She got on the phone. And I said, I just want to ask you a question, if I may. And I had read this information. I said, did you attend the University of Rochester in 1963? She said, yes. And I thought, oh, she's going to think the Alumni Foundation is calling for funds. At 9 p.m., she's going to hang up. And then I said, may I ask if the date May 18, 1966, has any significance to you? And she said, yes. And I said, I don't mean to intrude your evening. And I let her know that I just found out I was adopted recently, never knew my whole life. And I said, I hired a company, and they said that you may be my birth mother. She said, what color eyes do you have? And I said, gray, blue. And she said, what color hair? And I thought, do I tell her? L'Oreal, number 2. It's not a fun time in life. And I said, well, it's naturally auburn and naturally curly. And she said, mine is too. And we started an hour-and-a-half long conversation that I never dreamed I would have. And at the end of this conversation, I said, I just want you to know, I don't expect anything. I'm not trying to invade your life. I said, if nothing else, I just want you to know I'm alive, I'm healthy, I've had a great life. And she said, I want you to know that I've thought about you every day of my life. And she said, when I gave birth to you, they knocked me out so I would never be able to see you. She said, but a nurse came in about 3 a.m. and took my hand and said, shh, don't tell anybody. And she said, she brought me into you in the nursery, and I got to hold you once. She said, that was the hardest thing I've ever done. And she put me back. And for 41 years, she didn't know what happened to that little baby girl that in 1966 she just wasn't able to keep. She said, you already are family. And I would love to meet you sooner rather than later. What a call. 2 days later, what a week, I got a letter from the adoption agency. And I thought at this point, it's kind of interesting just to kind of find out what she was like in 1965 and 1966. And I already knew who she was, but I'm reading this information. And it's saying that she was 24, not 16, that I might have thought. Little cute cheerleader, little football player. You know, we have these scenarios. Broadway starlet from New York City. You hope. I also thought maybe I was Italian. Because if you've ever seen Rachel Ray on TV, she uses her hands a lot, and I thought, ooh, maybe I'm Rachel Ray's half-sister. Maybe we could have a show together. How cute would that be? All these different scenarios, and I'm reading this information to find out that I'm no longer half Russian, a quarter Scottish, and a quarter Irish. I am now German and English. All kinds of new food to taste, new traditions, new Christmas traditions. And that unexpected gift arrived in this letter that I got from the adoption agency. I'm reading all her physical description about her sisters and her parents, and I read a sentence that I know was the reason why all this happened. That I knew was the reason that God said, trust me, find out more. Because he had a gift he wanted to give me. I kind of think the real pretty kind that you get like from Bloomingdale's and Macy's with the pretty bows that you never can make on your own and you slide them off so you can keep them forever. They're just gorgeous. It's as if God had this gift up in heaven. And he thought, I can't wait to give this to Kirsten. Maybe when she's 8, no. Maybe when she's 18, no. And then 41 came around, he said, now is the time to give her this gift. And it was in just some words in a sentence, and as I read it, my life changed, and it said in the fall of 1965, it said October 1965, it was written to me, it said, your birth mother and her mom, my maternal grandma, had all the funding and money they needed. They went to Sweden to obtain an abortion. And the next sentence said that after being in Sweden for 4 weeks, they weren't able to find anyone that would perform my abortion. And I stopped reading right there. I thought, I wasn't even supposed to be born. I lived 41 years of my life not knowing how close this life was to ending. But as Psalm 139 says, that somehow God looked down to Rochester, New York, and looked in the little pregnant belly of my birth mom, and somehow, as she was traveling from New York to Sweden, he saw every day of my life inside of that womb. As I was being formed together and knit together, piece by piece, bit by bit. He saw this life. And somehow he knew at age 41, it would be my time to find out how close I was to not being here. And for some reason, every abortion clinic that they went to in the country of Sweden was not able to get rid of this life. That's an unexpected gift. I didn't expect through this crazy journey to find out how close I was to not being here, but God said, I want you to know how very much I love you and how I have plans for your life. 4 weeks after that first phone call with my birth mom, my brand new stepdad, a new half-brother that I never knew existed in my life, and his wife and his 2 daughters, they all came to stay in our home for 4 days. Do you know how I cleaned? I cleaned good for the mother-in-law, but I mean, I pulled every dish out and I pulled every drawer out. Washer and dryer, you know that's important if you clean behind the washer and dryer. And I cooked that whole weekend because I wanted my birth mom to know that I had learned how to cook and I knew how to clean. And that Sunday morning, they came to our church, and they're not church people. And as we were rehearsing up front, rehearsing the music, I saw them come in the back, and I saw them come in, and I thought, oh, I need to go out and meet them and say good morning. And I went out, and their eyes were kind of big, just kind of looking around, and I said, good morning. I said, don't worry about a thing. This is a great service. I said, this is not the Sunday that we handle the snakes. And I mean, and I thought, oh, new family of mine, I have so many years of catching up with you, so many. And they came in that morning and almost took up a whole row in that church that we were in. And it was so unbelievable to be singing songs of worship and to look out and see brand new family. To see the woman who I was formed in sitting there looking at me. And that morning, I was able to sing an old-fashioned term, a special. And I sang a song and I dedicated it to her that morning. It's a beautiful song. It's a prayer that's been put to music, and I'd love to sing for you what I dedicated to my birth mom that morning. I know our time is almost up. I just want to encourage you tonight. I don't know whatever unexpected gift has come into your life or what might come into your life in the next weeks or months or years. I want to encourage you tonight to trust him, to know that through these circumstances, it really is true that his joy can be our strength. To listen to that soft inner voice as he whispers to you, maybe to find out more. Or if you're walking down a path you never thought would be part of your life, to know that your steps are ordered of him. There's a reason and a purpose, and perhaps he just wants to give you a new chapter in your life story. Thank you for allowing me to be part of your evening. Love you all. Thank you.